Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of History Quest. I'm your host Brian Haynes, the director of the McLeod County Historical Society. I've got some great stories for you. One has to do with July 4th facts, since we're in the month of July now, and also some museum news for you, so sit back and enjoy. So this first story, I call it Much Like Mayberry. I came across this story about a bullet being lodged in a windowsill on Main Street in Hutchinson in 1927. And it just reminded me of an episode of the Andy Griffith Show, and so I had to write it just like that, and I'm going to share it with you right now. It was a normal day in Hutchinson, Minnesota, yet one that was met with an abnormal event. The year was 1927. A time at which Hutchinson was far less of a modern city and far more of a classic Mayberry. As quaint and as quiet as Hutchinson could be, the community was slightly shaken as it came to life on a Monday morning. Brown's Dry Good and Clothing Store was a popular place in Hutchinson. At the store's front were two large display windows that stood on either side of the main entrance. At this time, a set of fine coats were being displayed for pedestrians and shoppers to view. On this Monday morning, however, there was more on display as one of the windows appeared to be broken. Onlookers crowded around the store's front, observing the damage and wondering what could have caused it. Upon closer inspection, a theory that a bullet hit the window was suggested and confirmed, as a small hole was present along with several jagged lines that spidered from it. People both in and out of the store began searching for the bullet that had passed through the window, yet they couldn't find any evidence at all. The chief of police at the time was a man named Tony Mimbach. Summoned to the scene, the chief inspected the damage and asked if the bullet had been recovered. It had not, and it could not yet be determined if the damage was even caused by a bullet. With a mystery at hand, Chief Mimbach and the townsfolk would have to keep guessing at what and who caused the damage to Brown's store. The proprietor of the store was delighted. All throughout the day, people were gathered around the store to try and solve the mystery. In addition, they viewed and commented on a fine coat displayed that had come from New York and carried a hefty price tag of $32. While looking at the coat and the damage, one onlooker noticed something peculiar wedged into the frame of the window. The bullet had been found. It was strange that the missile had lodged itself where it did. Stranger yet that people stood around all day and never noticed it. It was obvious that the bullet had a bit of magic to it, as it was able to twist through the air and turn. After passing through the glass plane, the projectile turned at a right angle and slid between the pane and the tall curtain that bordered it before stopping as it hit the wooden frame. Chief Mimbach was on his beat when he was summoned to the scene. He was alerted that the bullet had been located, and it was without a doubt fired from a .32 caliber pistol. One has to imagine the police chief's ears turning red as he looked down on his belt at his own .32 that hung on its holster. One also must imagine the surprise of the onlookers when the chief declared, "It was me." In 1927, Hutchinson was plagued with the presence of stray and possibly feral dogs. In the early morning hours of that Monday, Mimbach was downtown on his usual patrol when he came across a stray dog that stood on the opposite side of the road near the park. He stopped his car near Kennedy's store and exited. Intending to chase the dog off, the chief fired his gun in the canine's general direction. Evidently, the bullet ricocheted off the curb and hit the window. The sound of the gunshot masked the sound of breaking glass. It was much like Mayberry, and perhaps Chief Mimbach should have carried his bullet in his pocket. So that was my Much Like Mayberry story. It's one of my favorite stories, and I say that every time I read a story, but this one is one of my favorite stories. I've always been a huge fan of the Andy Griffith Show, and not just because it's a great show and it's hilarious, but just that simplicity of the town of Mayberry. And I think, a lot of these rural towns in Minnesota at one time had that and are missing it today, which is a shame. But at any rate, here's an example that those days did exist, and did exist indeed right here in Hutchinson. My next story has to do with Glencoe, Minnesota, or at least near Glencoe, Minnesota. If you've heard of the Yellowstone Trail, this was a kind of a transcontinental trail that was meant to bring travelers across the continent to Yellowstone Park. And this was before the major highway system was developed. So you can imagine people driving down this in Model Ts and Model As. And the trail was, it was just basically yellow markers. They would either put like a yellow marker on a post or maybe even paint a rock yellow or something like that so you knew you were on the trail. And they did have maps and everything, but it just followed county roads and city roads all the way east out to Yellowstone. And part of it passed through McLeod County, went by Glencoe and then down by Brownton and everything on its way west. And at any rate, this story has to do with a little bit of foul play that happened on the Yellowstone Trail. So here we go. John Larson was a wealthy widower. The year was 1919, and John was in his brand new Elgin 6 automobile. He was on his way home from Minneapolis to his McLeod County home on an old dirt road called the Yellowstone Trail. The Yellowstone Trail was an early automobile route that spanned across America. It was created by two ambitious businessmen in 1912, a time when automobiles were the newest thing and the roads that they drove on were often rough or slippery with mud. The trail was a transcontinental route of sorts that passed through the heart of McLeod County. There were few maps of the day, and the roads were seldom marked. The Yellowstone Trail countered this issue by creating their own maps and placing markers along the roads. Sometimes a marker was something as simple as a yellow painted rock. It was on this trail that McLeod County resident John Larson met with some trouble. In Excelsior, Larson picked up a couple of hitchhikers, two men who appeared to be soldiers as they were in uniform. In Victoria, they stopped at a garage so Larson could have his vehicle looked at, a typical occurrence as those early cars could often prove to be unreliable. From there, the three men trekked west through Glencoe and continued on their way. At one point, a gun was drawn. One of the soldiers had been concealing a handgun, and he pulled it on Larson. The two men ordered him to pull over and forced him out of the car. With his hands in the air, Larson exited just as another vehicle came cruising by. With a gun in his back, Larson was ordered to a nearby cornfield, was forced to his knees, and was gagged. One of the men retrieved the car's crank, which was used for starting the car, and used the crank to beat Larson to death. They then stole the car and headed off. A ways west, in Sisseton, South Dakota, the two bandits stopped at a boarding house. One of the men had been driving and was stopped for driving without a license. He took the police back to the boarding house, likely under the guise that his license was there. As they approached the room, he shouted that he was under arrest. His accomplice came through the door, weapons in both hands, freed his accomplice, and then they made their getaway. They stole another car with a farmer as hostage and escaped. The police finally caught up with the two bandits in Montana, where they confessed to their crimes. They claimed to have no intentions of killing John Larson. The men were brought back to McLeod County and went on trial. As you might have guessed, the courtroom was packed tight as the men stood trial. The case carried on for several days, and the men were ultimately found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in Stillwater Prison. The murder and mystery behind the disappearance of John Larson had been solved, and the men put away for life. The historic trail would go on to serve as a nationwide route for many years, though never again would such a travesty happen in McLeod County's section of the route as it did on that fateful day when John Larson took a treacherous trip down the Yellowstone Trail. So that was our Yellowstone Trail story. Interestingly enough, right before I wrote that, we at the museum were visited by some people who are putting together a website for the Yellowstone Trail, and it just kind of shows what roads, the ones that still exist, people took to get there, and there's some stories on that site that have to deal with the Yellowstone Trail. They stopped at the museum and were looking for stories, and they have this, the treacherous ride down the Yellowstone Trail, and then they also have the story of Hangman's Bridge, since the trail went through Glencoe. And granted, this is before the trail was created, but the story from the area, you know, in case people are traveling through and want to know stories about those towns, Hangman's Bridge was such a, I shouldn't say great story, because really it's tragic, but such an important part of history that happened in Glencoe, so they put that on the website as well. A few more little tidbits about the Yellowstone Trail. There were actually a lot of like stores, you know, stores almost like convenience stores of sorts at that time that would be built along the trail, or garages, filling stations, and they would a lot of them would say, you know, Yellowstone Trail gas station or Yellowstone Trail repair shop. Like I had kind of alluded to also, that this was before there was any major highways going through the United States, and as transportation evolved, the Yellowstone Trail just kind of drifted off into obscurity. But it's just kind of neat. It passed right through McLeod County here, and it was kind of in its own way, like the Route 66 of its day. So very interesting. My next story and final story is just not really a story, but just some 4th of July facts. 4th of July is coming up, or as you're watching this, it may have already passed. That doesn't mean people don't really celebrate it for the entire month, because they do. You're apt to hear firecrackers going off at your neighbor's place basically for the rest of summer, a lot more of them close to the 4th of July, and you'll probably hear quite a bit that night. And of course, you're going to see red, white, and blue everywhere, and kids with sparklers, baseball games, beer, hot dogs. It's just a great holiday, great time of year. I think we as a nation do a good job of commemorating why we're celebrating on the 4th of July. However, there's some interesting facts behind 4th of July and facts that have to do with 4th of July that, given that we're in the festive mood, I thought I'd share it with you this month. So here we go, some July 4th historical facts. The 4th of July is set to commemorate the birthday of the United States. A summer day in 1776, when the original 13 colonies declared their departure from the British Crown by signing the Declaration of Independence. It's not widely known, however, that the Declaration was not signed on July 4th, but simply adopted by the Continental Congress. In fact, most signatures were not collected until August of that year, and the document wasn't even sent to Britain until later after each person had signed. Now, the Continental Congress may have adopted the Declaration on July 4th, but the actual act of voting for independence came 2 days earlier on July 2nd. In fact, founding father John Adams was adamant, and pun intended there, that Independence Day be celebrated on July 2 instead of July 4. In a letter he penned to his wife, Adams wrote, "The second day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival." Unfortunately for Adams, he didn't get his wish and was so annoyed that he would not celebrate the 4th of July on the 4th of July. You can imagine he celebrated it on the 2nd of July. He even refused invitations to commemorate the event for the rest of his life. So basically, if somebody was going to invite John Adams next door for barbecue on the 4th of July, he'd give him the what for and refuse to come. Moving on, news traveled fast in the old days, likely faster than the mail does today. And it didn't take long for people in the colonies to learn that their independence had been declared. Loyalists were, of course, dismayed. Yet those in favor of the act were so overjoyed that mobs formed and they took to the streets. On the night of July 4th, 1776, citizens of Philadelphia ripped King George III's coat of arms off the State House door and cast it into a bonfire that had been created in the street. In the Bowling Green section of Manhattan on July 9th, military personnel and colonists toppled a statue of King George III and melted it into musket balls to be returned to his troops. Now, the United States may have been born on July 4th, but it would take a few years to win a war against the British and be recognized as an independent nation. With the war won, the holiday became official, with Massachusetts being the first state to declare the day an official state holiday in 1781. It wouldn't become a federal holiday, however, until 1870. For years, the holiday was commemorated by ringing the Liberty Bell 13 times. That is, until a crack, which incidentally happened the first time it ever rang in 1752, to become too severe to ring anymore, so the bell was retired. Since then, only descendants of the founding fathers are allowed to quote-unquote ring the bell by tapping it 13 times. Lastly, and in an almost poetic sense, 3 United States presidents, all of whom were founding fathers, died on July 4th. James Monroe, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams. The latter two, Jefferson and Adams, were once great friends. However, once they entered the political ring, they turned bitter rivals and were very sour on each other. However, as they retired from politics, they became great friends once again. On July 3rd, 1826, Thomas Jefferson, who had been suffering from an intestinal disorder, collapsed and fell into a coma. Later that same day, John Adams fell unconscious in his reading chair. Around 5:30 p.m. on July 3rd, Adams uttered his last words, and they were, quote, "Thomas Jefferson still lives." The following morning on July 4th, both men died on America's 50th birthday. Unfortunately for John Adams, his death came 2 days late. So there's our 4th of July historical facts. I always love that little bit about Adams and Jefferson. They actually, so during the Revolution, they were sent over to Europe, to rally support and everything, and they became great friends. They really got to know each other. And Adams, of course, was the first vice president of the United States, and Jefferson would later become president of the United States. However, much like today, they found themselves having 2 completely different political ideologies. Today we'd have one on the right, one on the left, and essentially it was the same back then. And they really learned to hate each other for a long period of time, and it wasn't until they were old men that they decided to put their differences aside and become friends again. It reminds me a bit of that old movie with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, Grumpy Old Men. Because they're great friends when they're kids, and they, of course, fight over a woman. And then as old men, they become great friends again. However, I don't think, maybe, I guess we never know. In the movie Grumpy Old Men, Walter Matthau takes a dead fish and throws it in the back of Lemon's car, and then, vice versa. Lemon takes a dead fish and throws it in the back of Walter Matthau's car, and he's driving around, can't understand what that smell is, and rather than clean out his car, he puts a whole bunch of pine tree air fresheners in there. Hilarious if you have that kind of sense of humor, I guess. But at any rate, you have to wonder if either Jefferson or Adams took a dead fish and threw it in the other one's carriage. Who knows? At any rate, they did die on the very same day, which happened to be the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Well, not really, but the day we commemorate it. And like I said, I just had to throw that little twist there in there at the end and wonder if Adams would have preferred to die on July 2nd instead, since he was, so sore that the 2nd wasn't Independence Day. So those are our stories for the month. I hope you enjoyed them. I've got some museum news here for you to share. First of all, if you've been, reading our newsletter and everything, you'll know that we had the oak trees that were out front or around the building, and they have bur oak disease, and they're just kind of slowly withering away. However, those trees can be treated to kind of prolong their lifespan. And so we were able to do the treatment, thanks in large part actually to the city of Hutchinson. We were, we were looking at like over $2,000 to have to treat these. And of course, we're a nonprofit. We don't have a ton of extra money just laying around. And so it was suggested to reach out to the city. And so that's exactly what we did. And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. They already treat their own trees, and they can help us out with ours. We just have to pay for the jug of treatment, and they'll put it in. And it helped us out a lot. And so special thanks to Donovan, the city arborist, and of course just the city of Hutchinson for helping us out. And then also with the city, we have a new row of trees planted on our north side of our property. We were forced to take those old cherry trees down that were on the north side of the building. They were the drought really hit them hard last year, and they had some age on them. And the cherries were falling, and they would make the sidewalk really slick after they had fallen and gotten trampled on and everything. So it was a little bit of a safety hazard, given we have a lot of elderly people come into the museum. We have a lot of people come in, but we have a lot of elderly people come in. We wanted to make sure they're not out there slipping and sliding on rotten cherries that are on the ground. So at any rate, we were forced to cut those down last year. Those were planted, however, in memory of people. People gave money to have a tree planted and have their plaque put underneath. And so we kind of, in a sense, killed two birds with one stone here by putting these new trees in, because we needed to replace them. And then also we wanted to have a little bit of a vegetative screen on our north property. Since we have a metal roof, we don't want the glare bugging the people that are back there. And so the city, again, they came and they planted some trees for us. They put mulch beds around them. They're watering them. Some of the neighbors helped out with this, and it's great. We were able to put some memorial trees back up for people, and the city helped out with it. So again, thanks Donovan, and thank you to the city of Hutchinson. A couple of events coming up. On July 21st, we'll be doing history writers at the museum. This is at 2 p.m. We've had 2 of these meetings so far, and if you're not familiar, it's just a little writers group. Myself, Kay Johnson, and quite a few museum members, or just people who like the museum, have been coming to the event, and we just share what we've been writing with each other. It's great. Recently, the most recent topic was how history has evolved in a sense, or how interpreting history has evolved. We had one person who's actually rewriting a history book, and in that history book, it was talking about the Dakota Indians during the Sioux Uprising, or Dakota conflict of 1862. And this person, they're essentially transcribing an old text and putting it into the new text, so they didn't really want to change what was in there. So we just kind of put just put a disclaimer in there that said, hey, this was written long ago, and we wanted to share that so people can kind of see how interpreting history can evolve and everything. And so that was kind of our topic. But we talked about other things. Some of the people that come in, they write just family history, stories that they've collected from the past, and they write them down, put them in a family history book to be able to pass it on to future generations. And then, of course, you had, like Kay and myself, or just kind of talk about what we write and how we write it and how we choose it and that sort of thing. But it's been a very good group. Some people come just to listen to what we have to talk about, and others come to get tips on how to write about history. At any rate, our next one is July 21st. We always do this on the third Thursday of every month at 2 p.m. Moving on to the next month, on August 8th, we have John Munns coming in. And this will be at 10:30 a.m. where we kind of do our little breakfast club kind of thing, where museum members can come in and they can, have a cup of coffee, have some donuts on the house. Admission is free, and we just kind of sit around and usually have like a little round table discussion on whatever topic. This month, however, or not this month, August, however, we will be having John Munns in to talk a little bit about KDUZ and music history, maybe even a little bit of fair history, since it's the fair month. So if you're a fan of John Munns, definitely stop in for that one. Moving along in August, on August 25th, we'll be having History Writers. Now, I had said before that History Writers is always the third Thursday of each month. Because of the fair, the third Thursday falls on August 18th, and so we didn't want to have something conflict with the fair, so we moved it up to the following week. So we will be having our August History Writers meeting on August 25th at 2 p.m. That is our news for this month. We had some great stories. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope to see you at our events coming up, and so I guess this is my farewell. We'll see you next month. Thanks.